After Mr. Takeda signs, the money will never make it back to Japan. Nolan Pierce said it in Japanese so softly that most people in the private dining room kept smiling, sipping wine, and pretending the night was ordinary. But behind his chair, with a crystal water pitcher balanced in both hands, Simone Carter heard every word. Her fingers paused for less than half a second. Not long enough for anyone to notice. Not long enough for Grant Whitaker to turn around. But long enough for the truth to enter the room like cold air under a locked door. The Meridian West Hotel in Los Angeles was built for nights like this. Glass walls overlooking the city. Gold light dripping from chandeliers. White roses arranged in tall vases along a table long enough to make people feel small. Outside, traffic moved along Wilshire Boulevard in thin red lines, and the Hollywood Hills glimmered in the distance like a promise made only to the rich. Inside, a $500 million investment dinner was moments away from becoming history or disaster. At the head of the table sat Grant Whitaker, 42 years old, white, billionaire founder of Whitaker Capital Holdings, wearing a charcoal tuxedo and the kind of calm expression men practiced after years of being obeyed. Newspapers called him visionary. Competitors called him ruthless. His employees called him sir, even when he was not in the room. Tonight he needed this deal more than anyone knew. Whitaker Capital had survived on reputation for months, but reputation did not pay debt. Reputation did not stop creditors from calling. Reputation did not keep investors from asking why cash reserves had quietly thinned. Across from him sat Hiroshi Takeda, chairman of Takeda Global Trust, a Japanese investor whose quiet presence held more power than all the loud confidence in the room. Beside Takeda sat Claire Donovan, his senior legal advisor, silver pen placed neatly beside her untouched tea. She watched documents the way a hawk watched movement in tall grass. And near Grant's right shoulder sat Nolan Pierce, his chief financial officer, smiling too easily. Simone noticed that first. The smile. People who were honest did not need to smile that much when contracts were on the table. She moved behind the guests silently, her black uniform pressed clean, white apron tied tight around her waist, natural curls pulled back at the nape of her neck. 26 years old, black, tired from a double shift, and invisible in the way service workers became invisible around wealthy people. They saw her hands when glasses needed filling. They saw her shoes when something spilled. They did not see her mind. That was their mistake. Grant lifted his glass and smiled toward Takeda. Tonight is about partnership, he said smoothly. Two great institutions building a future together. Takeda nodded politely. The interpreter beside him repeated the sentence in Japanese. Nolan leaned slightly toward a junior associate and murmured in Japanese again, his voice wrapped in confidence. Once the transfer clears, they will not be able to reverse it without court action. Simone felt her stomach tighten. Transfer, reverse, court action. Those were not words people used for an honest partnership. She continued pouring water because her face had learned discipline long before tonight. But her ears sharpened. Her breath slowed. Grant turned suddenly, noticing her still near the table. Careful with that, he said, his voice cool and public. This table is worth more than your yearly salary. A few men chuckled quietly. Simone lowered the pitcher with steady hands. Yes, sir. Grant smirked, enjoying the obedience. Just pour the water. Do not pretend you understand the table. The laughter came softer this time, but it still came. Simone did not answer. She did not need to, because while they laughed at the waitress had just understood enough to know that someone at that table was being set up to lose $500 million. Simone Carter stepped away from the table with the water pitcher still in her hands, but her mind stayed locked on Nolan Pierce's words. Transfer, reverse, court action. The phrases repeated inside her head like warning lights flashing in a dark hallway. Around her, the private dining room at the Meridian West Hotel continued glowing with expensive calm. Silverware whispered against porcelain plates. Wine glasses reflected soft gold from the chandeliers. Outside the glass walls, Los Angeles stretched beneath the night in ribbons of headlights and distant hillside mansions. Everything looked smooth, controlled, beautiful. That was how powerful people liked danger to look before it became visible. Simone moved toward the service station near the wall and set the pitcher down carefully. Her hands remained steady, but her chest felt tight. She had spent enough years working high-end hotel events to understand that rich men often spoke freely around waitresses because they assumed service meant silence. They discussed divorces, boardroom betrayals, lawsuits, political donations, and family secrets while someone in an apron refilled their drinks. They believed invisibility belonged to the worker, but really, invisibility belonged to the listener. Simone knew how to listen. She had learned it long before the Meridian West. Years earlier in Seattle, before Los Angeles, before night shifts and rent notices and grocery budgets written on the backs of receipts, Simone had studied accounting at a community college near Lake Washington. She loved numbers because numbers did not sneer. Numbers did not care about your skin, your uniform, or whether someone thought you belonged in the room. Numbers either balanced or they did not. But when her younger brother Marcus was diagnosed with a chronic condition that required constant care, Simone left school without a ceremony, without a goodbye speech, without anyone from the admissions office asking what happened. She picked up shifts, first at a diner, then at hotels, then at events where people paid more for one bottle of wine than she spent on rent. Japanese came from the Tanaka family, her neighbors when she was a child. Mrs. Tanaka watched Simone and Marcus after school while their mother worked late shifts at the hospital. She taught Simone hiragana at the kitchen table, then phrases, then stories, then patience. By 17, Simone could hold conversations in Japanese. By 26, she could hear arrogance hiding inside polite business language. And tonight, Nolan Pierce had not been polite. Across the dining room, Grant Whitaker was still performing confidence for Hiroshi Takeda. "Our structure is clean," Grant said smoothly, sliding a leather folder closer across the table. "Transparent. Efficient. Built for long-term growth." The interpreter began translating, but Simone saw Nolan's jaw tighten slightly. Too much control in the face. Too much attention on Takeda's pen. Claire Donovan noticed details too. Her eyes moved between Grant, Nolan, and the contracts with quiet precision. She had not touched her tea in nearly 15 minutes. Simone reached for a tray of fresh glasses and began crossing the room again. As she passed behind Nolan, he leaned toward the junior associate and whispered in Japanese, "The English side says investment. The Japanese side locks control. He will not catch it before the funds move." Simone nearly stopped walking. Nearly. Instead, she kept going, each step careful against the polished floor. Her pulse had become strangely calm now, the way it did when the truth finally stopped being a question. This was not confusion. This was not careless translation. Someone had written two versions of the same promise, one for trust, one for theft. Grant glanced up as Simone passed again. "Still hovering?" he said, just loud enough for nearby men to hear. "I said water, not commentary." A small wave of laughter moved around the table. Simone lowered her eyes professionally. "Of course, sir." But as she turned toward the sideboard, one page slid loose from the folder near Takeda's elbow, pushed by the air conditioning vent overhead. It drifted halfway open before settling flat on the table. Simone saw the English phrase first, strategic investment partnership. Then she saw the Japanese line beneath it, transfer of operational authority upon fund release. Her breath caught silently. Two contracts, two truths. One signature away from $500 million disappearing behind beautiful words. Simone Carter stood beside the sideboard with a tray of clean glasses in her hands while the words on that loose page burned through her thoughts. Strategic investment partnership in English. Transfer of operational authority in Japanese. One sounded like cooperation. The other sounded like control. Around the table, the dinner moved forward with the smooth arrogance of people who believed nothing could interrupt money once it started flowing. Grant Whitaker leaned back in his chair, smiling toward Hiroshi Takeda with the polished ease of a man who had rehearsed trust so many times it almost looked real. Nolan Pierce watched the documents like a man guarding a secret he thought was already safe. Claire Donovan watched everyone else. Simone noticed that most of all, Claire's pen rested untouched beside her tea, but her eyes kept moving. Grant lifted his glass again. "Mr. Takeda, I want you to know this partnership is personal to me," he said. "My company is not just looking for capital. We are looking for a partner who understands legacy." The interpreter translated carefully. Hiroshi Takeda nodded once, calm and unreadable. Simone could feel the old investor measuring every word, every pause, every smile. But she also knew something he did not yet know. The words being spoken out loud were not the same words waiting for his signature on the page. That was how betrayal worked in rooms like this. It did not arrive shouting. It arrived printed on thick paper with clean margins and a silver pen beside it. Simone carried the glasses toward the table, moving slowly enough to read another line as she passed. The English version promised shared growth and mutual oversight. The Japanese clause beneath it allowed immediate control transfer through a Delaware holding company once funds were released. Her accounting background filled in the rest before anyone said it. The $500 million would move first. Authority would shift second. By the time Takeda Global realized the structure was not what they were promised, the money would be tangled behind lawyers, shell entities, and emergency filings. Simone's mouth went dry. She had seen enough. But seeing the truth and speaking it were two different kinds of courage. Grant's voice cut across the table again. Simone, is it? He had read her name tag this time, but not with respect. With performance. She looked up. Yes, sir. Grant gestured toward an empty plate near Nolan. Clear that. Quietly. Another soft laugh traveled around the table, less amused than obedient. Simone moved toward the plate without expression. As she reached for it, Nolan said in Japanese, barely above a whisper, "Do not worry." She looked scared enough to stay quiet. The words did not break Simone. They steadied her. Fear was familiar. Dismissal was familiar. What was unfamiliar was having the exact key to a room full of locked lies and knowing everyone expected her to leave it hanging on the wall. She picked up the plate gently, turned, and walked toward the service station. Her reflection appeared briefly in the dark glass beside the city lights, a black waitress in a white apron carrying porcelain through a room where $500 million was about to be stolen in polite language. For 1 second, she saw herself as they saw her. Staff. Background. Someone to command and forget. Then she saw herself as Mrs. Tanaka had seen her years ago at a small kitchen table in Seattle, sounding out Japanese phrases until midnight, learning that every language carries more than words. It carries truth if you listen closely enough. At the head of the table, Claire Donovan opened the contract folder fully and slid the final signature page toward Hiroshi Takeda. Nolan's eyes flashed with relief. Grant straightened in his chair. The silver pen moved closer to Takeda's hand. Simone turned from the service station. Her heart beat once, hard and clear. Then she stepped back toward the table, no longer moving like a waitress trying not to be seen, but like a woman who had finally decided the room was going to hear her. Simone Carter reached the table just as Hiroshi Takeda's fingers moved toward the silver pen. The room was still smiling, still glowing, still pretending the future was clean and certain, but to Simone it felt like watching someone reach for a beautiful door with a cliff behind it. She placed the empty tray down gently on the sideboard. The soft sound was barely noticeable, yet somehow Grant Whitaker heard it. His eyes lifted first, sharp with annoyance. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Simone looked at him, then at Nolan Pierce, then at the contract resting in front of Takeda. Her voice came out calm. "Yes, sir." The entire table paused. Forks stopped. Glasses hovered. Even the interpreter looked up slowly. Grant gave a small laugh, the kind designed to remind everyone who mattered and who did not. "Then speak with the service captain." Simone did not move. "It concerns the agreement." The silence that followed was immediate and complete. Los Angeles glittered beyond the glass walls, distant and indifferent, while inside the Meridian West dining room every face turned toward the black waitress in the white apron. Nolan's expression changed first. Not much, just enough. A small tightening around the mouth. A flash of calculation in the eyes. Grant leaned back slowly, his smile becoming colder. "I thought I already made something clear," he said. "You are here to pour water." Simone felt the words hit the room, but she did not let them enter her. "Mr. Takeda," she said, turning toward the older investor. Then, in fluent Japanese, she continued, "Please do not sign yet. The English contract and the Japanese contract do not say the same truth." The room froze so completely that the candle flames seemed louder than the people. Hiroshi Takeda's hand stopped inches above the pen. Claire Donovan sat upright at once. The interpreter stared at Simone with open shock. Nolan lost all color in his face. Grant blinked once, then twice, as if the language itself had struck him harder than any accusation could have. Simone kept her posture straight, hands folded in front of her apron. The English version describes a strategic investment partnership. She continued in Japanese, each word clear and respectful. But the Japanese clause gives operational control after the funds are released. Claire reached for the contract immediately. "Translate that," she said sharply to the interpreter. But she did not need to wait. Takeda had already opened the folder again, his calm expression now gone. Nolan spoke quickly in English. "This is absurd. She is misunderstanding technical language." Simone turned toward him, still calm. "You said the English side says investment and the Japanese side locks control." The words landed like glass breaking under velvet. Nolan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Grant's chair scraped softly against the floor as he stood. "Enough," he said, voice low. "This is a private business matter." Claire looked at him across the table, her hand already moving through the pages. "Not anymore." The interpreter began reading faster now, voice tightening with every sentence. Takeda's eyes moved from the Japanese text to the English text, then back again. His face did not show anger. It showed something worse for Grant. Clarity. Simone stood in the middle of the room she had been told not to understand, and for the first time all night, nobody laughed. They had thought her silence meant ignorance. They had mistaken her apron for a wall. But the truth had been standing 3 feet from the contract the entire time, listening in a language they believed she would never know. Claire Donovan opened both versions of the contract across the table with the precision of someone trained to find the smallest crack in the strongest wall. The private dining room no longer felt like a celebration. The gold chandeliers still glowed. The wine still shimmered in untouched glasses. Los Angeles still glittered beyond the glass like nothing important had changed. But inside the Meridian West, every polite mask had slipped. Hiroshi Takeda leaned over the pages slowly, reading the Japanese text himself now, his expression hardening line by line. The interpreter stood beside him, voice quieter than before, translating each phrase into English with careful discomfort. Strategic investment partnership. Operational authority transfer. Fund release. Delaware Holding Company. Each term landed on the table like another locked door opening to reveal the same ugly room behind it. Nolan Pierce sat motionless beside Grant Whitaker, his hands folded too tightly in front of him. Grant, however, remained standing, trying to wear authority like armor even as the room stopped believing in it. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, each word controlled. International contracts often use different language depending on jurisdiction. Claire did not even look up. Different language is not the same as different rights. The sentence sliced cleanly through his defense. Simone Carter stood near the sideboard with her hands folded in front of her white apron, feeling the weight of everyone watching her now. A few minutes earlier, Grant had told her not to pretend she understood the table. Now the table waited for the truth she had carried in silence. Takeda turned one page, then another, slower this time. His calmness had changed shape. It was no longer patience. It was judgment. "Miss Carter," he said in English, his voice soft but clear, "please tell me exactly what you heard." Grant's head snapped toward him. "Mr. Takeda, that is unnecessary." Takeda did not look away from Simone. "I will decide what is necessary." The room went still again. Simone breathed once, steady and quiet. "Mr. Pierce said that after you signed, the money would never make it back to Japan," she said. "Then he said the English side says investment, but the Japanese side locks control." Nolan swallowed visibly. One of the junior associates looked down at the table as if the wood grain had suddenly become fascinating. Claire's pen moved across a legal pad in quick strokes. Grant laughed once, but it sounded thin now, stripped of power. "You are going to rely on a waitress translating private conversations?" Simone looked at him calmly. "No, sir. You can rely on the contract." Claire finally raised her eyes. "She is correct." Those 3 words emptied the air from the room. Takeda slowly closed the folder, but he did not remove his hand from it. "If signed," Claire continued, "the agreement would allow operational authority to shift after funds were released. The English summary does not disclose that clearly. The Japanese version contains language that is materially different." Grant's face tightened. "It is a drafting issue." Claire's voice stayed flat. "It is a $500 million drafting issue." Nobody smiled after that. Nolan's confidence had vanished completely now, and Grant knew it. Everyone knew it. The man who had spent the night controlling the room was suddenly trapped inside the consequences of his own paperwork. Simone lowered her eyes for a second, not from fear, but from the strange sadness of seeing truth arrive too late for grace. Takeda pushed the silver pen away from the contract with one finger. The sound was small, barely a tap against the table. But in that room, it sounded final. "There will be no signature tonight," he said. Grant stared at him. "You cannot walk away over one clause." Takeda looked at Simone, then back at Grant. "I am not walking away because of one clause," he said quietly. "I am walking away because the person you disrespected understood honesty better than the people who wrote this agreement." For a moment after Hiroshi Takeda spoke, the entire dining room forgot how to breathe. The silver pin remained untouched beside the closed contract folder, no longer a symbol of opportunity, but a monument to how close $500 million had come to disappearing behind polished language. Grant Whitaker stood at the head of the table with his hand resting on the back of his chair, his face still composed, but his eyes betraying the panic he could no longer hide. Nolan Pierce stared down at the table as if the white linen could swallow him whole. Claire Donovan began collecting the contract pages carefully, separating the English and Japanese versions into two neat stacks. Her movements were calm, professional, and devastating. Every sheet she lifted seemed to remove another piece of Grant's control from the room. "All documents remain here," Claire said evenly. "No one removes copies until my team photographs and logs every page." Grant's jaw tightened. "This is unnecessary." Takeda looked at him with quiet disappointment. "It is very necessary." The words were soft, but they carried the authority of a door closing forever. Simone Carter stood near the sideboard, still wearing her black uniform and white apron, still holding herself with the same quiet discipline she had carried all night. But the room did not see her the same way anymore. Earlier, the guests had looked through her as if she were part of the furniture. Now every glance landed carefully, almost respectfully, as if they were suddenly aware that intelligence had been standing beside them the entire time. Grant noticed it too, and that seemed to unsettle him more than the failed signature. He turned toward Nolan, voice low and sharp. "Explain this." Nolan looked up quickly. "Grant, I thought the legal team had aligned the language." It was a weak answer. Everyone heard it. Claire stopped writing and lifted her eyes toward him. "You were the one who sent the final bilingual packet to our office." Nolan swallowed. "I reviewed the financial terms, not every operational clause." Simone heard the lie immediately, not because she was a lawyer, because fear had changed his rhythm. Earlier, his Japanese had flowed easily, arrogant, and smooth. Now every English sentence came out uneven, built to protect himself before anyone else. Takeda folded his hands on the table. "Mr. Pierce, you spoke tonight as if you understood the difference between the documents very clearly." Nolan's mouth opened, then closed. The silence answered for him. Grant slowly stepped back from the chair, realizing the betrayal had shifted direction. The scam that was supposed to save his company was now exposing the people closest to him. But there was no innocence left for him to hide behind either. Not after the way he had defended the process. Not after the way he had tried to silence Simone. Claire placed the final page into a folder and looked at Grant. "My recommendation is immediate suspension of negotiations pending independent review." Takeda nodded once. "Agreed." The word landed like a gavel. Grant's $500 million lifeline vanished without ceremony. No shouting. No chaos. Just one clean decision made by people who no longer trusted him. Simone exhaled quietly, feeling exhaustion rise through her body now that the danger had passed. She tried to step back toward the service hallway, but Takeda turned to her again. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "please stay a moment." Grant looked away, humiliated by the reversal he could not stop. The waitress he mocked had not only understood the table, she had become the reason the table survived. Takeda's request stopped Simone Carter halfway between the table and the service hallway. She turned slowly, still holding the posture of someone who expected permission to leave a room where everyone else assumed they had the right to stay. The Meridian West dining room had gone quiet in a way luxury spaces rarely did. No clinking glasses, no rehearsed laughter, no confident voices smoothing over uncomfortable truths. Just the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant glow of Los Angeles beyond the glass. and a $500 million deal lying dead in a folder Claire Donovan had already marked for review. Takeda gestured gently toward the chair beside Claire. "Please," he said. Simone hesitated. "Sir, I should return to work." Claire looked at her with something close to respect. "You already did the most important work in this room tonight." Grant Whitaker's face tightened at that, but he said nothing. He had spoken enough. Everyone knew it. Simone moved slowly toward the chair and sat down carefully, her white apron folding across her lap beneath the chandelier light. The chair felt strange beneath her, too soft, too expensive, built for people who expected the room to listen when they spoke. Across the table, Nolan Pierce looked smaller now, his earlier arrogance stripped away by every document Claire placed into evidence folders. Takeda leaned forward slightly. "How did you learn Japanese so well?" he asked. Simone breathed in quietly. "A woman named Mrs. Tanaka taught me when I was young. She lived next door to my family in Seattle." Her voice softened without losing strength. "She used to watch my brother and me after school. She said language was a bridge, but only if people crossed it with honesty." Takeda's expression changed at that. Not dramatically, just enough to show the words had landed somewhere personal. "She was wise," he said. Simone nodded. "She was." Claire glanced toward the documents again. "And accounting?" Simone looked down briefly at her hands. The hands that had carried plates all night. The hands Grant had assumed knew nothing beyond service. "I studied it for a while," she said. "Community college first. I planned to transfer. Then my brother needed care, and life got expensive. Nobody rushed to fill the silence after that. Wealthy rooms often loved stories of struggle only after the person telling them had proven useful. Simone understood that too well. But this silence felt different. It carried recognition, not pity. Takeda turned toward Grant then, his voice calm but final. "Mr. Whitaker, tonight I learned more about your company from your treatment of this woman than from your presentation." Grant swallowed, his confidence flickering under the weight of that sentence. "I did not design those clauses personally," he said quietly. Claire closed one folder. "But you defended them before reading them." Simone looked at Grant then, not with triumph, not even with anger. Just clarity. He had mocked her because he thought power made him safe. Nolan had whispered in another language because he thought intelligence had a uniform. Both men had been wrong. Grant's eyes met hers for a second, then fell away. That small surrender said more than any apology could have in that moment. Takeda stood slowly from his chair, and everyone else instinctively followed except Simone, who remained seated, still unsure if the rules had changed enough to include her. Takeda noticed and smiled gently. "Miss Carter," he said, "some rooms do not deserve the people they overlook." The words settled over her like warmth after a long cold season. For the first time all night, Simone allowed herself to breathe fully. Not because the wealthy men had finally seen her, but because she had finally refused to disappear for them. By the time the Meridian West dining room began to empty, the city outside had turned midnight blue. Los Angeles still glittered beyond the glass walls, but the room itself had lost its golden illusion. The flowers looked too perfect. The wine looked untouched. The $500 million contract sat sealed inside Claire Donovan's evidence folder, no longer a promise of partnership, but proof of how easily trust could be dressed in expensive paper. Grant Whitaker stood near the window alone, one hand in his pocket, staring out over Wilshire Boulevard like the traffic below might explain how quickly a man could lose control of his own story. Nolan Pierce had already been escorted into a separate conference room with legal staff, his confidence gone, his voice reduced to careful answers and long pauses. Nobody followed him. That was how power worked when fear entered the room. It separated itself from the person falling fastest. Simone Carter stood near the service station, untying her white apron with slow, tired fingers. The adrenaline had faded now, leaving behind the ache in her feet and the heaviness of everything she had risked by speaking. A server named Luis passed quietly behind her and whispered, "You were incredible." Simone gave him a small smile, but the words did not settle easily. Incredible was not what she felt. She felt exhausted. She felt relieved. She felt like someone who had stepped into traffic to stop a stranger from walking into danger, then only afterward realized how close she had come to being hit herself. Across the room, Takeda spoke quietly with Claire near the exit. Before leaving, he turned back and walked toward Simone with the same calm dignity he had carried all night. "Miss Carter," he said gently, offering a business card with both hands, the Japanese way, respectful and deliberate. Simone accepted it with both hands because Mrs. Tanaka had taught her that too. Thank you, sir. Takeda nodded. There are people who know languages, he said softly. And there are people who understand meaning. Tonight you did both. Claire stood beside him, holding her leather folder against one arm. My office will be in touch, she added. Not about tonight's review. About you. Simone blinked. Me? Claire smiled faintly. People who can read contracts, numbers, and character are rare. Grant heard the sentence from across the room. Simone saw him turn slightly, and for the first time that night, his face carried no arrogance, only regret. Takeda and Claire left through the private doors, their footsteps fading into the hallway. The room settled into a quieter kind of silence after that. Not empty. Changed. Simone slipped Takeda's card into the pocket of her apron and reached for her coat. That was when Grant approached slowly, stopping several feet away as if he finally understood distance could be a form of respect. Miss Carter, he said quietly. She looked at him without fear now. Yes, sir. Grant lowered his eyes for a moment. The apology seemed difficult for him, not because the words were complicated, but because pride had made them unfamiliar. I was wrong, he said. About the contract. About this room. About you. Simone did not answer immediately. Some apologies needed space around them to prove they were not just another performance. Grant swallowed. I treated you like you were invisible because it was easier than questioning myself. The chandeliers hummed softly above them. Outside, Los Angeles moved on, careless and bright. Simone folded her coat across her arm and met his eyes. Being invisible was never the truth, she said softly. It was just what made people comfortable. Grant nodded slowly, and this time he did not defend himself. He simply stood there, a billionaire with no deal, no applause, and no excuse left to hide behind. The private doors closed behind Takeda and Claire Donovan, leaving the Meridian West dining room wrapped in a silence that felt completely different from the one Simone Carter had carried all night. Earlier, silence had been survival. Now it felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to stand. Space to understand that the room that tried to shrink her had been changed by the very voice it dismissed. Grant Whitaker remained a few feet away, looking older beneath the chandelier light than he had at the beginning of dinner. His tuxedo was still perfect. His watch still gleamed. His name still carried weight across Los Angeles boardrooms. But none of that could repair what everyone in that room had seen. A billionaire had mocked a waitress, and the waitress had revealed the truth his empire tried to hide. Simone slipped her arms into her coat and untied the white apron from around her waist. The simple motion felt strangely powerful. For the first time all evening, she was not removing a uniform because her shift was over. She was stepping out of a role other people had confused with her worth. Grant watched the apron fold neatly over her arm. What will you do now? He asked quietly. Simone looked toward the glass walls where Los Angeles shimmered below in endless lights, beautiful from a distance and difficult up close. She thought of Marcus sleeping back at their apartment, his medication lying neatly beside the kitchen sink. She thought of Mrs. Tanaka's old flashcards tucked inside a shoebox under her bed. She thought of the community college account she had not logged into for years because dreams could hurt when money made them feel impossible. Then she touched Takeda's business card in her pocket and felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time. Possibility. I will go home, she said softly. Then tomorrow, I will decide what kind of room I want to walk into next. Grant nodded slowly, accepting that answer because it gave him nothing to control. That too was new for him. At the service hallway, Luis and two other servers stood quietly near the kitchen entrance. They did not cheer. They did not make the moment loud. They simply looked at Simone with the kind of respect working people understand without needing speeches. She smiled at them, tired but steady. Then she turned back once toward the long table. The roses, the untouched wine, the sealed contract folders, the silver pen that never got used. All of it looked smaller now, less powerful, almost ordinary. Grant followed her gaze and exhaled softly. I thought money was the strongest language in the room, he said. Simone looked at him with calm eyes. It is not. He did not ask what was. By then he already knew. Truth. Dignity. The courage to speak when silence would have been easier. Simone walked toward the exit, her shoes quiet against the polished floor, the business card resting in her apron pocket like a door not yet opened. Behind her, Grant remained alone beside a table that no longer belonged to him. Outside, Los Angeles kept glowing as if nothing had happened, but something had. A woman they called Invisible had stopped a $500 million lie with a language they never expected her to know. She did not shout. She did not beg to be believed. She simply spoke clearly, and the room had no choice but to listen. And long after the chandeliers dimmed and the contracts were locked away, everyone who sat at that table would remember one thing. They thought she was only there to serve water, but she was the only one who understood what was really being served.